Hi, everyone. We're just getting everyone in from the waiting room. So if you're joining, we appreciate you being here at 2 o'clock and joining us for this conversation. We know there's quite a number of folks who registered for this. I think we hit over 170 registrations for this webinar today. So I'm going to get started because there's a lot that we're excited to share with you. And as people join, they'll kind of tag in as we go. So for those I haven't met, I'm Amy McIsaac. I am the Managing Director of Learning and Experimentation at Philanthropy for Active Civic Engagement. We go by PACE. And we're so excited you're here with us because we are talking about a topic that has been near and dear for PACE for many years. And something that we have been really working on the last couple of months, really with an eye towards how do we be a resource for folks, particularly in a year like 2024. So one of the kind of inspirations of this project, we really decided to make the core and centerpiece of this webinar was that people were telling us they used to be saying words, and now they feel like they're sending signals left and right. And we started to kind of shorthand this with calling it almost like signal speak. Our civic language has almost become these little signals we're sending to people. And sometimes it's on purpose, and sometimes it's not, and sometimes it's helpful, and sometimes it's destructive to our relationships. But how do we start to understand this more? And so before we get into the data, what I wanted to do is just make sure those of you who are new to PACE and the PACE space kind of have an orientation to the organization and what we do. I also want to make sure you know my colleagues who are on this call, and you'll see peppering into the chat here and there. Want to make sure I say hello to Joy Turner, our Managing Director of Member Engagement. Siri Erickson, our program lead and the person who's really been my partner in steering this program. Kevin Singer, who's our communications lead, and Bhumika Shah, who is our operations lead. Many of you know our CEO, Kristen Campbell. She had a last minute unavoidable conflict, but we're excited you have the full rest of the team here today. Again, for those of you who are new to PACE, we are a philanthropic laboratory for funders who are in some ways thinking about how they can maximize their impact on democracy and civic life in America. So we are a philanthropy serving organization, a PSO, if you know that acronym. We have 75 funding institutions, so grant makers who are our members. And for the last almost 20 years, we have been looking at civic engagement and democracy topics from a variety of angles. The last 5 years, we've really been focusing on civic language and the perceptions Americans hold about them. So some further context to the data we're going to show you today. I just wanted to give you a very high-level overview of that 5-year journey. It really started in 2019 when we were hearing from our members specifically that the coded and loaded nature of civic terms was starting to become a problem. And the question really sounded like this: how do I understand this better? It was a very high level question that was really at the beginning of scratching the surface. And we worked with a partner for a 1,000-person survey that was trying to understand questions like which words are resonating the most and least, which words are understood, which ones are clear, and which ones are the most politicized. So it was a really beginning of an exploration for the purposes of our member base at the time. But the chorus of need became louder, and it became stronger, and it became broader. And around 2021, we were really hearing from philanthropy at large, funders even outside of our membership, that were detecting a disconnect between the words they were saying and what they felt people were hearing, particularly around, again, these civic terms. And the question now changed a little bit to something that sounded more like, what should I say instead? And so we scaled up the project. We went from 1,000 people in 2019 to surveying 5,000 people in 2021. We expanded our list of terms. We started to really understand how perceptions differ based on identity and experiences. And we were really trying to understand in 2021 as well who Americans associate with using the terms. So we were trying to understand something deeper about perceptions, and then also who people think are using these terms. If you're a part of that chapter of this journey with us, you know how rich the learnings were that came out of this. We had deep dives and mini grants and analysis left and right on so many different threads of exploration. It resulted in a report, American Civic Language, where we released our 9 biggest findings from, months and months and months of analysis of the data. And then that actually spurred some work we did with civic funders and civic leaders to provide guidance. So folks who were on the front lines of working on these challenges around language in their own work, how are they navigating it? And what were the experiences they had to share about how to navigate some of the challenges in using civic language today? So that was released in December of 2022. We ended that year and we were like, great, civic language is solved. We're good, right? Except no. Obviously, the chorus got even stronger and got louder and got broader than we could have imagined. And for 2023, we really were hearing a return back to this concern about the coded and loaded nature of civic terms, but it started, frankly, to sound a little bit more desperate and urgent. So really feeling like that coded and loaded nature had become untenable. And the question we were hearing most was, are there even words I can say anymore? And that might be a question that you've asked yourself in your work as well. And so we picked back up the civic language journey and we did another 5,000 person survey in November of last fall. And what we were trying to understand, and you'll see this in the survey that we'll go through in a minute, we're really trying to understand a couple of things. First, we designed the entire survey to give us a snapshot 2 years after we had a snapshot in 2021. So trying to understand something about the change and the delta in perceptions in 2 years. We also really designed the survey to help us get some signals and understanding of why Americans hold the perceptions they do. We really wanted to go that next level deeper of, okay, we feel that we're sensing Americans feel this way about a word, but why? And then the other thing we're really trying to understand is what influence are civic terms having in people's lives, particularly in the civic behavior and the civic actions they choose to engage in. So that was kind of the high level concept and the questions that were leading us into the data that we're excited to share today. Let me tell you too where we are today. I think this is helpful context, frankly, also about what happens after today. So to take you back in September of 23 is when we really started that design phase of the current chapter we're in right now. We worked with Citizen Data. Mindy Finn, if you're on this call, so appreciate your partnership, and team, Kurt and Jenna and Nicole and everyone there. You guys have just, Marie, everyone has been fantastic in helping us design what is the right survey of Americans on these terms today, and especially relating back to the 2 years ago survey that we did. Many of you on this call probably also shaped that survey because we did an input survey in the fall that asked folks, really anyone we could get the input survey in front of, what words do you want us to study? And we basically adopted what we heard from the field were the biggest needs. So you'll see that in a minute. In November last fall is when we started to do the survey collection. So the survey itself was in the field November 9th through 27th. Again, 5,000 American registered voters. When we came back from the holidays is when we started to do the early analysis on what we were seeing as initial cuts. So we were looking at the data from a whole bunch of angles, and we started to develop some of the tools we're excited to release today as well, which brings us to today. Today, we are releasing the data. It's in the format of an interactive dashboard, which we'll preview in a little bit, and a ton of other tools that we've developed to help you continue your learning for your work as well. After this, and after this session, we will be engaging in a couple months of intense learning and activity. We have webinar series planned. We have ways for you all to request data that will help you learn and us learn. We have an AI platform we're excited to share. And then we also have a lot of speaking engagements already on the calendar for places that we think you likely will be too. And so we're excited to share analysis there. All of that is going to be the basis that gets us to a place where we've turned over as many stones as we can. And we're in a place where we could really release what we think are the findings of this data, this really rich set of data. What do we think really should be seen as analysis from it? That is what we're planning to do end of summer, early fall. We're timing all of this not so secretly because we want this research to be a resource and a support for people working in the civic space on its way to November and election day. So we want that report kind of out there and available for folks, and to be as supportive as we can for folks who are looking towards the election and needing some help in communications before then. So let me tell you a little bit about the survey. I think this is important context before we can even show you any of the analysis. But like I said, it was 49 questions that we developed in partnership with Citizen Data. The survey instrument itself included a couple of sections. We had a whole section on demographics, a whole section where we were asking people to tell us their impression of terms, a whole section that was asking different questions about their feelings towards the terms. And then there was one question about how they were defining certain words. So really rich data on the end of that survey instrument. What I think is important to know is that you see here on the slide in the middle left, these are the words themselves. There's 21 words that we tested in the survey. We thematically clustered them so that we could do stronger analysis on the back end. But as a survey participant, you were evaluating one cluster. So you got 7 words that were with you through the duration of the survey. Every participant didn't get all 21 words. They got 7 words that they were kind of looking at through all the different questions that we brought them through. I also want folks to know that we had a couple partners at the point of survey collection that wanted us to do and sponsored oversamples. And so we do have oversamples on Iowa, New Hampshire, Pacific Northwest, rural males, Appalachia, Kentucky, and then rural Midwest. We thought it was really interesting. We put out a call to our members and said, anyone want an oversample before we go out in the field? And what came back, there was a pretty clear thread on rural communities. And so we're excited to see kind of where that analysis, as our partners kind of go into their own data sets and compare it to each other and compare it to the national sample set, and really start to see a picture around rural emerge. So just know that's in the water as well here. So like I said, the terms are here. Also, the demographic identities that we captured are here, as well as a couple of the experiences we asked people about in the survey. If a thing is bolded in the middle here, it's because we also asked it in 2021. So you can kind of see the thread of comparison that's possible. In the word set, there was 11 that we carried over from 2021 to 2023. But we also wanted to make sure we were testing some new words and seeing some new detail on language. And so we had 10 new words, which are the unbolded ones on this slide. The identities in this chapter of the survey, we included employment sector, which we're really excited about, to see how different sectors are perceiving the language as maybe separate or different from other sectors. We included a question asking folks about their first language, as well as state. And then what I want to point out in the experiences side of things is civic education. We did ask a question about civic education in 2021, and we know how much this research was leaned on by that community. We were so inspired to see how much that community really used this research to help make the case around investment, around making the case in general for civic education, helping to understand what communications will be effective in that space. And so what we did in 2023 was really design the survey, particularly the civic education questions, to provide more nuance and sophistication. And there's just a lot more we can offer there. So we did kind of scale it up for that community in particular, which you'll see as we go. So all of that was in the field for about 3 weeks. It was the almost exact 3 weeks that our survey was in the field 2 years earlier. So we have this really nice kind of snapshot of 2 years in between. We had 5,033 people fill out the survey. We were shooting for 5,000, so got a little bump. We did filter on voters voter registration. So the first question people asked, are you registered to vote? If it was a yes, proceed. If no, they were filtered out. That I think is really important to know, that that was a intentional choice and design choice we made in this survey. So what you see in the data is responses from people who are registered to vote in the United States. It's also a nationally representative sample. So we weighted analysis on party ID, race, gender, and education. And for those researchers who are on the call, the margin of error is plus or minus 1.4%. So those are some of the stats I know that are important for folks before we go into the analysis. One other thing I want to make sure folks know, I got a little bit into it in that last slide, but there's many universes that we would love to explore under the umbrella of civic language. And we really sat in that design phase to make intentional choices about what we thought the survey we wanted it to do and what it wasn't really designed to do. So before we go into the analysis, I think it's helpful for us to just be really honest and upfront about what we designed it to do and what we did not design it to do. Therefore, there are some limitations, I think, to the analysis overall that we want to be upfront about. So first of all, like I said, we filtered on registered voters. So what this survey is not designed to do is tell us how Americans who are not registered to vote perceive terms, just those who are registered to vote. Also, this survey is not designed to give us certainty about how people assess the concepts behind the terms. So one of the things we talk a lot about as a team is like, okay, so we know this group of people feel this way on this term, but like that's all we know, right? Like they like this word. How they feel about the concept behind it is probably not too far of a leap, right? If they're positive on the term, probably representative of the concept, but we don't have 100% certainty of that. So we always hold that as an asterisk for ourselves in our own even interpretations. We didn't design the survey to tell us if people use these terms in their lives or really how they're using them in their lives. Like the usability of it isn't something that we designed the survey to do. We also didn't design it to tell us if these impressions that Americans have of these terms are based on their personal experience or their interpreted ideal of the experience. So take, for example, a word democracy. Are people positive or negative or neutral on it because of their experience of American democracy or because of their hope and aspirational ideal of it that maybe we aren't there yet, but that's how they were interpreting it? We don't have certainty on that. The last thing I think this is important, we did not design our survey to establish a cause and effect relationship. So we will be able to see correlation, but we can't say because X, that drove Y. And this is particularly important when we get to attitudes and behavior. So because somebody is positive on a word doesn't mean it was the reason that they did X behavior. We can see probably correlation as we go into the analysis, but want to be upfront that we don't have a cause and effect relationship. That wasn't how we designed the survey. But here's what we did design the survey to do. It can tell us how American registered voters perceive the terms, and that is a big swath of the American public. It will help us compare civic language perceptions by identity and experiences. So we wanted to be able to hold up groups and see how they are different or similar as we go, and that is part of the design. One of the kind of foundational concepts of this whole project in this chapter was to help us understand the why behind the perceptions. So the survey was designed to really help us get underneath perceptions to understand some of the why. And then what I'm really excited about is that definitional question that's at the end of the survey instrument. So each survey participant was served up one of three words: democracy, civic engagement, or racial equity. And we asked them to tell us in their own words how they define that word. And so we have 5,000 Americans' own words on how they define these terms, which I think is just a treasure trove of potential of learning and understanding. I'm super excited to pull out the 18 to 24-year-old bracket of those words and see where they are pointing us to in terms of the future of this language. So there's just a lot, I think, that the survey can do and was designed to do. So what are we going to do here today? We're going to do two things after all that context. We're going to share what we were learning about 2023 perceptions at a high level. Again, we are at the beginning even of our own analysis. We anticipate being at a place where we can speak much more sophisticatedly about what we're seeing in summer, early fall. But we do have some things that we're seeing right now that we didn't want to hold folks from also learning with us. So we'll share those today. And then we're going to give you tools. We're going to put you in the driver's seat of ways that you can use our data to inform your learning and your work and your work on the way to the election and beyond. So that's what we will do today. And just to get us started, let's talk through these high-level tour of findings. We have a couple pieces that, again, we didn't want to wait too long before we made sure you all saw them as well. So first, let's just talk at the most high level here. What is the basic snapshot of how Americans perceive terms. You can see the 21 terms we tested on the left side here. Your purple bar is the rates of positivity. Your orange bar is negativity. Neutrality is in gray, and unfamiliarity is in yellow. So I think what's really key here is that Americans are mostly positive on civic terms. And for those of you who are with us in the last round of this research, I would almost change that to say Americans are still mostly positive on civic terms. So positivity has been a continuing thread of how Americans perceive these terms. I think what is different this time around, though, is that in 2021, the word unity was our top word, and it was our top word overall. And by every way we cut the data, unity kept going top of the list. And it was top of the list at about 70% positive, which is now like a middle of the pack number. So in 2023, we're seeing numbers like freedom, our top word there is at 87% positive. These are numbers we were not seeing 2 years ago. And so really interesting to see how much more positive Americans have gotten on civic terms. And we have some data in a little bit we'll show you on that as well. I also noticed pretty low on familiarity here, which is really encouraging, maybe not totally surprised in some of the words like freedom or service or community. We, of course, see a bigger unfamiliarity chunk in a word like bridging, which I think is a really interesting word for us to go deep on over the next couple of months, because we know how much it is playing a role, particularly in the philanthropic space around democracy right now, but broader. So definitely something there that we want to dig into a little bit more. But this is the highest level picture of where Americans are right now. Taking into account the cluster lens, so again, we had 7 words that we called our democracy cluster, 7 for our civic engagement cluster, and 7 for our racial equity cluster. And we just looked at the overall positivity if we take those words, positivity as a whole. And what's really interesting here is that democracy terms are most favorable to Americans, and by a significant difference. So we see a 10 percentage point difference over racial equity cluster, and a 15-point difference with civic engagement cluster. I think this is really interesting. I think it's also fascinating that I'm not so surprised democracy cluster is so favorable, but I'm surprised that racial equity cluster is the second most favorable, and then civic engagement, mostly because in the last round of research, we saw how a lot of the words that were in that racial equity cluster had a bit of a polarizing effect. And so the fact that overall Americans are positive on that at 64% is I think really interesting and frankly encouraging. So there was a question in the survey that asked people, okay, you got these 7 words, which one's your most positive? Which one's your favorite? And they could pick one. And then there was a question that asked them, okay, why? And there were 9 options given, the 8 that are here, and then there was 1 that was none of the above. The next question they got in the survey was, okay, of these 7 words, which one is your most negative? Which one is your least favorite? And then why? And it was the same options, just in inverse in language with, again, none of the above. So essentially, people could pick their favorite word, their least favorite word, and they had very parallel options for positive and negative reasons. So for example, they were served up on this personal values one. I feel like this term reflects my personal values as a positive option, and this word does not reflect my personal values as a negative option. For feelings about the future, it was this term makes me feel hopeful about the future for positive, and this term makes me feel fearful about the future on the negative side. Politicians portray this term in a positive light, politicians portray this term in a negative light. So you get the gist, and that was kind of the way that the survey was designed, which allows us to see something I think really interesting here. Americans seem to be telling us that they have different reasons for being positive and negative on civic terms. So the reason that people were positive on their most positive term was because it was aligned with their personal values. We see that top of the list on the positive side. But on the negative side, look at the role politicians are playing here. We don't see that role on the positive side, but politicians portraying a word in a negative light is the top reason that people were negative on a word. So the outsized influence of politicians on the negative side of things is really interesting to us. And I think also a major clue into how we might get people more positive towards words and where interventions might make a bigger difference than others. So there was also a question that asked folks, because of this coded and loaded nature that we were hearing and thinking about, we asked a question, do you think this term brings people together or drives them apart? And they were given kind of the scale that you see at the bottom of this graph here. And what we did is we decided to turn this into a score, what we're calling our Bring Together score. And so what we see here is how Americans feel and perceive that these different terms, how effective they are in bringing people together. So a word like community, Americans think does a pretty good job of bringing people together. And a term like racial equity at the bottom of the list doesn't do as good of a job. We could also inverse this and call this the drive apart score, but we're optimists, so we're calling it the Bring Together score. I think what really stood out to us when we looked at this data was that the terms that signal broader values are perceived to bring people together. So there just feels like there's a different flavor to us in the words that are at the top of this list than the ones that are at the bottom. So at the top, we see community, unity, service, belonging, kind of broad values. Where towards the bottom of this list, we see words like bipartisan, republic, democracy, constitution, like some of the more politically specific words. So we're still trying to figure out how we want to interpret the signal that we're seeing, but there is something about the broader values that are more kind of value shared across lots of people are the words that people are perceiving to bring folks together. Another question that we asked was similar, but asked people, do you think this word is meant for you or meant for somebody else? So we were trying to understand something about ownership here and the ways in which people feel like the words belong to them or they have access to these words for their own use. And so here again, we developed what we called a meant for me score. Folks were given a scale that you see at the bottom of this graph. And what we see are words where at the top, Americans have a stronger sense of ownership around. So freedom, American, I think that's really interesting. Citizen, liberty, Constitution. If you remember back to the last slide we looked at where we were looking at bring together scores, what stuck out to us is that the top 5 words felt very different than the top 5 words that were bringing people together. And so in that list, we saw the top 5 words that people perceive to bring together were community, unity, belonging, service, and freedom. But here we're seeing words like freedom, American, citizen, liberty, Constitution, different flavor to these words. And so we're interested in that whole part. Another thing we're interested in is the fact that, so what I just put up here is the orange arrows. These are the words that are in our democracy cluster. Look at that. They're right at the top. And so it does feel like there's something going on around Americans having more ownership on the whole around words that were in our democracy cluster than in our civic engagement or our racial equity cluster. So that stuck out to us as well. So this is really interesting too. We asked folks does this term make you feel motivated too? And depending on the cluster that they were getting for the words, they got different motivating action. So if folks got the civic engagement cluster, they were asked if these words motivate them to help others in their community. In the racial equity cluster, does this word help you feel motivated to stand up for a cause you care about? And in the democracy cluster, does this word make you feel motivated to vote? And we start to have like motivation scores here as well. What we think is really interesting is that certainly there are words that Americans are telling us are doing more to motivate them to these civic actions than others. So I don't think it's as helpful to see this as a whole because we asked about specific actions to the different groups. But if you are trying to get somebody to help others in their community, a word like community or service or belonging seems to be more effective than bridging or bipartisan. Standing up for a cause, I might advise you think about the word unity and equality and maybe a little less on social justice, racial equity. And if you're trying to get people to vote, which I know many of us are in this year, freedom and American seem to do a more effective job than republic, I'd say, is like the one that lags behind here. I do want to name that republic is maybe a choice. People are like, why did you pick republic? One of the reasons that we picked the set of words, and I can go more into that if that's of interest to folks, but we wanted to, one of the filters we used in final selection of words was to look at words that we were hearing people use as stand-ins for words that they felt like were no longer really useful or as effective, or maybe sending the signals that they didn't intend. We've been hearing for a while how the word democracy has become a word that is sending signals left and right, and people aren't sure if they should use it anymore. And we've been kind of hearing that people are starting to say republic, or like experiment with the word republic as a stand-in. So that's why it made the final cut. And I think it's really interesting that, you know, in a cut of the analysis like this, we see a word like republic lag in something like motivating others to vote. And I think there's a lot of democracy next to republic questions that we have that we want to go into the analysis for. So that's what I would call our baseball card stats for those athletic people out there who I'm not, so I may not have even used that terminology properly, but you know, kind of like the basic stats right off the bat, here we go. But we've also been in the data lately trying to understand some of the deeper, more complicated, more interesting, juicy storylines. And that's the journey we feel like we're really just beginning on. But there's 3 that we feel like we're ready to share today that we think might be interesting and helpful for you as well. So first and foremost, like I said, so much of the purpose of this survey was so that we could look at 21 and 23 data next to each other and just see what we see. At the highest of levels, we see something really interesting. Word positivity over 2 years has gone up pretty significantly in some cases. So the words that are showed here are the 11 words that we retested. So this is the full retested set. And for the most part, perceptions of civic terms got more positive in the 2 years. The 2 storylines that maybe aren't as true there are unity and diversity, though I do want to point out that they are either at or within or very, very close to our margin of error on the 23 survey. And so I might even characterize them as like holding steady. But we do see numbers like liberty going up by 20 percentage points in net positivity in 2 years. I mean, we're really seeing some very interesting gains here. The why behind this is something we want to dig into more over the next couple of months. There's some hypotheses that we've been floating around. You know, is it that people got more positive? And that's just true. Is it that people got more positive in their version of the term? And so we're actually not experiencing like increase in positivity, but like increase in positivity. There's a question of like, you know, the 2021 survey was in the field not even a year after January 6th or a vaccine rollout. Were people just in a particularly negative place in 2021, and 2023 is actually more representative of a normal benchmark. So I think there's a lot of hypotheses that we're thinking about and we want to explore more. Honestly, if you have any hypotheses on this, please put it in the chat, because that's a trail that we want to start exploring down. But we think this is super interesting and honestly not something we really expected. So it surprised us for sure, and we think we're gonna put some muscle into this one. This next storyline is juicy. So who does democracy work for was a question that we asked right after the demographics, but before we got into the impression questions on the survey. This is not yet cut with language. We want to do some language cuts with this, but this is so interesting that we felt like we needed to show this. So the question asks, who do you think American democracy works for? And people could select all the options or none of the options. So this is a select all that apply question. And we see that 38% of our survey respondents said they thought the country as a whole, democracy is working for the country as a whole. But then we see something interesting where either of the options that had somebody other than them, we see a higher percentage of selection there than the options of people who they may have been included in. So those purple bars there, you know, people who are different from me, people who have different political beliefs than me, I think the country is working for, that is a combined 58%. The orange lines there, where it's like people who are like me, people who have the same beliefs as me, we see a combined 44%. So we're seeing something on the whole where Americans believe democracy is working for others, not me. And, whether or not they see themselves included is in the country as a whole is an open question for us. So, so this is really interesting to us, but we have started the analysis cuts as well demographically underneath this. And one thing that stuck out for us, we don't have it visually today, but we did want to name Black Americans were more likely to say democracy is working for them than white Americans by a pretty big difference. So Black Americans had selected democracy is working for me or people similar to me at 58%, and white Americans at 41%. So I just think there's a ton of interesting storylines on this question alone. And then we start to cut it with the impressions, and we get, I think, somewhere really interesting. So this we wanted to make sure was on people's radar, both as a resource for you and as like an element of research, and just an open question that we intend to keep exploring. The last kind of juicy headline that we want to share is interesting. So we noticed in the bring together scores, we're looking at that list and we're like, okay, these words Americans believe are bringing people together. And then we were over here and we were looking at the motivation scores and we're like, okay, these words seem to be motivating people to action. And we're like, wait a minute, these kind of look similar. Let's run that analysis. And could it be that the words that are bringing people together are also the words that are motivating them to civic action? And our data confirms yes, at least from our survey and what Americans were telling us, there is a correlation between the words that people perceive to bring people together and the ones that get them to do something and motivate them to action. This flies in the face of what we know to be common knowledge, right? We are constantly hearing about how negativity and fear tactics are the most effective in motivating people. But Americans are telling us a different story. Americans are telling us this word makes me feel like it brings people together, and it's also making motivation a thing. So you can see the upward line here. For those researchers out there, this is a correlation coefficient of 0.62, which is considered strong. 1 would be like the most strong. So we're in a realm of strong here. And we think this is really interesting. We're not trying to upend, ton of political science research in the world, but there is a signal here that we are hearing loud and clear from Americans that we do intend to unpack more. So that is those are the headlines we have. We do have about 5 minutes for a question or two. We really just wanted to create a pause before we show you the tools. I don't have access to the chat in my view, but if somebody wants to raise their hand on the Zoom feature, I'd be happy to hear either a reaction or a question or something that someone wants to raise for thought for the group. Hi, Nancy. Let's hear. What do you got?
So I asked the question, thank you, Amy. I asked the question in the chat. In the very beginning, when you said people were resonating toward democracy and unity, but you filtered for those who were registered to vote. I am wondering whether whether there is work to do with the people who are not registered to vote, who may have negative feelings about democracy or, equity or equality or whatever, belonging. It seems to me that the filter, this is really good news for the people who are registered to vote in many ways, that they are feeling more more engaged, but it's the ones who are not. I'm just curious whether you're going to do another study.
Hey, we'd love to. We need resourcing for it, but for sure, that's a whole part of the civic language universe that we haven't gotten to explore yet. But I agree with you. And I also think that there's a good number of people who are registered to vote who don't vote. So, also knowing kind of what level of hanging fruit do we want to tackle in how this research might shape where we put energy. It's a great question, Nancy, and I think a very valid case on the people who are not registered to vote. So hopefully more in the future. But yeah, that is kind of a filter we want to make sure people see and understand in our research.
Thank you.
Siri, what's been going on in the chat? Anything interesting to hold up?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think people are taking it all in.
Yes, I know it is. We always are like, how do we not move too quickly for everybody here? And I should point out too, on our website, pacefunders.org/language, a lot of the slides I just showed are up there. So if you wanted to spend a little bit more time looking and kind of taking it in, that's all available there for you as well. But I'll pass it over to my colleague Siri, who's going to share more about the tools that we have developed. There's 5 in total that are going to put this research in your hands and let you kind of steer it as you need it for your work. So Siri.
Yeah, great. So as Amy mentioned, we designed this survey for you. Truth be told, we are very much civic language nerds here at PACE, and so we love digging into the data. But the most important priority was to make it accessible to you all and to others who are not on this call. So we're just going to take a tour through some of the different ways that you can access it. The first one is an interactive dashboard. This is free to access. And for those of you that spent some time playing around in the 21 data on that dashboard, this one is new and improved and even better than the last one. It does contain the 21 data as well. And eventually you'll be able to compare the 2 data sets. That feature is not quite ready yet, but you can see here, you can have lots of fun playing around with the data, doing all kinds of different cuts by different identity groups, demographic questions, experiences, and of course, the term impressions. So through our website, which Kevin has put in the chat several times, you can find access to a link to request your account through the dashboard. We do anticipate it might take about a day or so to turn around. So just know if you're really wanting to get in there, set up your account right away, and then you'll have access to it, for the rest of the year. The second thing we've created is an analysis request platform. There's a lot in the dashboard, but not all of our survey questions are able to fit neat and tidy into the data dashboard. And so this is a platform where you can request specific analysis that you're interested in, and we will generate the data visualization for you. This also is free. We will have this up all the time, and at the end of every week, we will take the top 5 vote-getting analysis requests, give them to our data scientist. He will create the data visualizations, and then we'll post them back in this site for everybody to see. So this is another way for you to get your questions answered, especially those that are more complicated than what the data dashboard can handle. Also new this year is a very particular AI tool. And we know that a lot of people are really struggling with, well, if I can't say that, what can I say? Or which words should I put together to reach my intended audiences? And so we have partnered this year with Pluralytics. They have a proprietary AI platform that is really built to help you write and rewrite your content better to reach the audiences that you're trying to reach. So we have 40 seats available currently, 20 for PACE members and 20 for others in the civic field. If you go to our website, you can fill out a brief form to let us know you're interested in getting one of these seats. And it's just really an amazing resource, especially for those of you that are regularly writing content and communicating to different audiences. So you can put in content you've written, it will score it based on the audiences that you're interested in, and also it can rewrite or write content for you for different kinds of communication platforms. So we're super excited to make this available. We kind of jokingly said, one person said, well, does that mean we're not going to need communications professionals anymore? And we said, no, we're just giving those communication professionals and anyone else who communicates a new superpower. So we invite you to express interest in getting a seat and accessing this really cool tool. And then we are going to be doing a webinar series where we will go deeper into some of the topics that we think have the most interesting storylines based on our initial look at the data. So the first one that we're kicking off on April 4th is, should we say patriotism? We picked patriotism to be a part of this series for a couple of reasons. Number one, because it's one of the most polarized terms in our data. And number two, it's a term that definitely skews toward people who are conservative, having more positive impressions of the term. We know the civic field as a whole tends to be moderate to liberal. Not everybody, obviously, but we felt it was really important for our field to really wrestle with patriotism. We know a lot of people are trying to figure out how to communicate with Generation Z. And for us, racial equity continues to be a really interesting term. There's a lot to unpack there. We want to really go into the data on rural communities with our oversample partners. And so we're going to bring a whole webinar just looking at that. And then we're going to conclude with a bang on the term democracy and really look at that term from all the different angles we can possibly imagine. So we hope you join us for 1, 2, all of these webinars, and you can sign up for those also on our website. In each of those webinars, we're just going to look at all of these different factors for the signals that we can see about that term. So more to come there, starting with patriotism. And then we're going to be on the road in person and virtually talking about civic language to different audiences. So if you're going to be at any of these events or conferences, please come see us at our breakout session, at our presentation. And then also if you're interested in us doing a presentation for your group or your organization, again, please reach out to us and we'd love to talk to you about what might be possible there.
Awesome. Thank you, Siri. We do have a couple extra minutes, and I did see some questions come through that actually I think, Siri, you're well positioned to respond to. So before we go to wrap up, I may just pose it to you.
Yeah.
So Chantel, hi. She wanted to know, does the Pluralytics platform include our findings in the recommendation engine? In other words, is the recommended language based on our data findings?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we've done is worked with Pluralytics. We have like a drop of data compared to their ocean. And so what we tried to do in partnership with them was to make sure that our data is in alignment with their ocean and kind of looking at that. And so with one exception, our data we did find is in alignment with what they have in their language tools. And so they made some adjustments in their data to make sure that that kind of outlier was aligned. And then also when you go in to use the platform, it will highlight our 21 civic terms in the content. And that's another way that we've linked up that tool to our data.
Awesome. Thanks, Siri. And Mary, I see your question about the Pluralytics seats, just trying to understand what those are. So a seat gives you access to the Pluralytics platform, and I will go back to show you briefly what that looks like. I mean, it's much more involved than we captured here for our slide. But you have 24/7 access to the platform, unlimited rewrites, unlimited scoring. You can just kind of like pop in content and it'll tell you how it's doing for the audiences you want to reach and then offer rewrites as you need it. So the seat just gets you access in. We also will be providing PACE hosted monthly check-ins, super optional. You can tag in as much as you want or not. It's just a space that if you're having either troubleshooting questions or, I'm seeing this trend and I want to understand it more, is someone else seeing that too? That's what that space is intended for. So a seat is really just access to the platform plus optional monthly meetings, if that's of interest to you. We also are hopeful that anyone who gets a seat from PACE is willing to come to a convening in November, virtual convening, where we can just kind of understand from a high level over the months that those folks were using this tool, what did they see, what did they learn, and how can that inform our collective thinking on civic communication. So that's what the seat is. If again, 40, we anticipate there to be a strong demand for these 40, particularly in this year. There is a way for us to secure more seats beyond. So I would just suggest, if you're interested in this, just go ahead and fill out the form on our website so that we can get you in the process of either one of these 40 seats or connected to another. Other questions that are on folks' mind before we start to wrap up?
Looks like we have another question in the chat about pluralytics. I wonder if there might be a way to make the output scoring from pluralytics among your seats to be available to all. Maybe that could be part of the output, that convening. Yeah, so sharing out kind of some of what we've learned through using that tool. That's a great idea.
Great. Wonderful. So let's move to wrap up here. So actually, Siri, if you could launch that Zoom poll, it seems that I
Yep.
can't do it. We'd love for you to just answer 5 questions to help us know how this information may or may not be valuable to you. So while you do that, I'd love to invite my colleague, Kevin Singer, communications lead, to just share some ways that you can share what you learned today, because we hope that you do want to share it afterwards. So Kevin, can you give us some thoughts on that?
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. This has been really exciting. We've been just preparing so long to be able to present this data to you. And where you can be most helpful is to share this new study and our data with folks that you think can really use this or put this data to work in what they do, whether they're leading a nonprofit organization, or maybe they're another foundation that is, are thinking through their strategic plan and what language to use. Anyone that might find this data valuable in their work or actionable, we would love for you to consider sharing this with them. And again, the URL for everything you need to know about this study can be found at pacefunders.org/language. So that's kind of a big thing we'd love for you to help us with. Something small that you could help us with now is if you would consider either retweeting PACE or sharing our LinkedIn post. I put a couple of links in the chat. This would be something just small that, again, you don't have to repost with any particular thoughts. You can just repost it on Twitter or LinkedIn. We would love if you would consider doing that. That would, I think, really expand the impact in the network that is exposed to this data. So again, thanks for being here. And if I can help in any way for you to communicate with your comms person at your organization to help us put some of the data out there, I'd love to talk with you. And so I'm going to drop my email address in the chat. And again, if there's anything I can help with on the comms side, please let me know.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, we really want this research to be a support to whoever needs it to be a support this year. And so please help us connect those dots where you can. And then just some last pieces here. I mean, everything we discussed today is live and ready for you to engage with. So we encourage you to get into the data. It's at pacefunders.org/language. Like Siri said, first-time users, it might take us about up to 24 hours, not longer than that, to get you into the system. There's just a little bit of back-end work to do, but otherwise you're good to go and have access to the platform for the rest of the year. You can already start to request a data visualization. So I think it's really fun to go to the page that Siri had in the slide. It's also at /language and start to see some of the requests people already asked for. I was on there this morning voting. I'm like, yeah, I want to see that. And so you can start to do that. You can let us know you want a pluralytic C. I know there's been a lot of interest in the chat, so go ahead and let us know already, and we'll start to kind of make some sense of all of that. And then for sure, we've got many more webinars, many more programs. If talking it out is your thing, there's going to be plenty of space for that. this year with PACE. And so the first one up is Civic Education and Civic Language, which is actually next Friday, one of the featured programs of Civic Learning Week. And so you can register for that on our website. And then the first PACE hosted webinar that we are doing as a particular part of this project is Should We Say Patriotism, as Siri mentioned, and that'll be April 4th. So go ahead, you can register for all or some or none of those, but it's all at /language. And we do hope that you join us for the continuing learning on civic language. It's an uncommon week if I don't have a daily conversation with somebody who is just kind of at a point of desperation of just like, I don't know what to say anymore. Will your research tell me? And I'm like, well, our research can do some things. It can at least provide some support. And what I think is really helpful about the way we've designed this project is that we don't feel like you have to stay stuck in civic language challenges. We think that there are some ways that we can collectively be really creative and supportive to new ways to talk about our civic life and our American democracy, and how we are part of the process of evolving that is something we're really interested in being at the table for, and we hope you are too. So thank you for coming today. We are available if you need us via email, and all the resources are ready to go. So we hope you start engaging. Thank you so much for being here today, guys.